Hey everybody, and I just wanted to take a second to welcome you to Math 130. So one thing we're going to be doing this semester is I'm going to ask you to take a look at a short video that's going to describe some of the stuff that we're going to be doing in class. What's really nice about this is I feel like the more times you see a topic, the more familiar you get with it, the more it sticks. You've got these to review in case you ever miss or you want to go back and find something. And furthermore, it allows us to get deeper and practice more problems when I don't have to spend so much time going over some simple definitions that you may be able to get on your own. So for this week, to start the class, Chapter 1 is really all about data and how we gather data. So it says, what is a necessary step before we can do any statistical analysis? Before you can do any stats, you've got to collect to get data. So we need to get some data. I'm using a new pen this semester, so I'm going to ask that you, if my handwriting is kind of ugly, just make sure you listen to what I'm talking through and try to write it much neater than I can. Again, I'm working on this, but it is a new piece of technology I'm using. Okay, so when we looked at two types of data, there's two types of data we could gather. We could gather some parameter data or data that is a statistic. Parameter data is data from the whole population. So data from a population. A statistic is data from a sample. Oops. So when you look at these two, what are the difference between one? Data from a population would be something like a census where I asked everybody a certain question. This is really hard data to get because usually population data is huge. This is a much easier, and this is what you're going to see a lot in statistics, is data from a sample. Blank data is whole countable data. So when we talk about types of data, discrete data is whole countable data. An example of that would be something like the number of pencils in my book bag. Blank data is data from measurements. We call data that is measured continuous. We'll get much deeper into this in class, but an example of continuous would be the length of my desk, because that would be measured, right? Okay, continuing on, there are levels of data or different types of data we can gather, and we're going to get some basic definitions of those types of data. Nominal data is categories. An example of this would be something such as eye color or hair color. Ordinal data is rankings. Examples of this data would be things such as how people finish a race or your top 3 favorite ice cream flavors. Interval data is numeric data, but 0 does not mean nothing. And I want to talk about what that means. Something where 0 does not mean nothing. The best example of this is temperature. Because when you see that something that is 0 degrees Fahrenheit outside, does that mean that there is no temperature? No, that just means that 0 is this arbitrary measurement. Finally, we have ratio data, which is numeric. And 0 actually means nothing. So what do I mean by that? Something like weight. Because if a scale says 0.00 pounds, we actually know how much stuff is on that scale. There's nothing on that scale. 0 actually means 0. Okay, the last thing that we're going to look at in week 1 for these videos, again, we're going to go in much more in depth in class and give some other examples and get some other stuff in class, but these are just some basic things that I wanted to go over with you. When a researcher collects data, that is called sample data. There's different ways to collect sampling data. We're going to talk about a couple different sampling methods. Convenient sampling is the worst kind, but it's basically just get the data. So an example would be that is call your 3 favorite friends and ask them what their birthday is. That would be convenience because there really is no method to this. You're just kind of at random asking some people. The next one would be systematic sampling, and that is going to be ask every, and then this is going to seem a little bit weird, but I'm going to write nth person. So an example of that would be I would stand out in front of the doors of COTC and ask every 3rd person to take a survey. So nth, this doesn't have to be 3rd, it could be 5th, it could be 8th, but we're going to keep on that systematic of getting every nth person regardless of what we choose that is. All right. And now finally, these last two, these are the most difficult because they're pretty similar. Cluster sampling and stratified sampling. Cluster sampling is going to be where we divide the population and sample all members of a few groups. So here's an example of how we would do that. Let's take a high school. If I were to divide a high school up by freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors, cluster sampling would be I'm going to survey all the freshmen and all the juniors. So you can see what we've done is divided the population up, and we're going to sample all members of a few groups. This time it would be the freshman and junior. Stratified sampling, however, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to divide the population up, and then we are going to sample a few from each group. So what do I mean by that? So let's say I divide the population up by freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior again. Again, this is the same regardless of whether it's cluster or stratified. Oh, sorry, I don't know why this is drawing. Anyway, and then we are going to sample a few from each group. What would that mean? That would mean, let's say I survey 10 freshmen, 10 sophomore, 10 juniors, and 10 seniors. So you can see we divided the population up, and then we'd sample a few from all of those different groups that we divided up.